It's about time I talk about Dead Static Drive again. The last video I made about it was in October 2022. So let's get into this horror-inspired survival driving game. In Dead Static Drive, you'll embark upon a nightmarish road trip across America in a weird version of the 1980s. It promises to blend weird fiction and uncanny eldritch themes with the spooky unease underlying this small-town life. Development on the game started all the way back in 2014, and finally, this past March, it got a release window. Q3 2024 for Xbox, Game Pass, and PC. But what really inspired me to finally talk about this game again are a couple new gameplay clips and scenes that have been shared in the Dead Static Drive's Discord server recently. All of this other footage I'm showing you is from at least 3 years ago, but the visual style has remained extremely consistent. And as a bonus, if you happen to be in Sydney from October 15th to the 22nd, you can play the game at South by Southwest. Now let's talk about gameplay. You're on the road and the world begins to fall apart in front of you. Your friendships will make every bit of difference as order collapses and the people you meet fight for their own survival. Sneak, scavenge, fight, befriend, barricade, and bunker in, or steal a car and drive off into the sunset. But there's no escape. There's only what you choose to do with the little time that's left. So Dead Static Drive is described as a survival game at its core, and it all comes down to surviving your own father and his delusions. Stop the continuing violence of an estranged father who's fast spiraled into a paranoid recluse convinced technology will ruin us all. You'll also have to deal with the police by equipping yourself and those close to you with the weapons and gear you need to survive. Learn how and who to trust, and learn it fast because the monsters are gaining on you. I did find these two very helpful diagrams that explain the main driving and gameplay loops in Dead Static Drive. You can kind of just pick a path to follow, an item and an action associated with it to see what rewards and consequences it might have in the game. For example, the player wields a weapon that can be used to build shelter or defeat monsters. Shelter provides sanctuary and repels monsters, but defeating the monsters instead means they won't kill the allies that can eventually become party members and provide you with a vehicle. It's really cool to see gameplay broken down into a simple guide like this, and I can imagine that it's helped a lot during development and just fleshing out ideas and mechanics. Then we have the driving diagram, which is basically the same idea. Now, these are a bit dated at this point, but I'm sure most of the basic stuff will be present in the game in some form or another. This work-in-progress map shows off the general layout of different towns and highways in the game too. Their placement is fixed, but content in them will be procedurally generated. Towns will have certain tiles that need to be there for story reasons, but will be placed in different spots depending on your specific playthrough and save file. This is actually pretty similar to another upcoming survival driving game called Pacific Drive. The world is broken into these different interconnected zones that the player will enter and exit at fixed points, but the landscape and enemies are randomized. In the intro, I mentioned that this is a horror-inspired game, and creative producer and writer for the game, Lena Van D, elaborated a lot on this idea in a post on the game's Discord server. The team has been getting intimately acquainted with the chasms between and the nuances of the weird, eerie, uncanny, marvelous, fantastic, grotesque, and egress. The post goes on to say that it's easy to use a lot of these terms unmindfully, just as a shorthand for a larger, vague concept. But there comes a point in the making where I need to shed the vague and nail these things down in detail so I can wield them far more practicably. And I think it's pretty cool the time and effort they're spending in really curating the game's vibe. A lot of those themes I mentioned are often used in horror games, and most of the time they're just buzzwords thrown around in a game's description. But the devs of Dead Static Drive want to use them properly and get as much out of them as possible. Now, I'd imagine that since this publicly playable demo is coming soon, there will be a lot more info floating around on the game, and hopefully a new trailer coming out soon. Until we reach that point, though, I'd highly recommend checking out Pacific Drive if you want a sort of first-person, science experiment gone wrong type spin on this game.